Hey game developers, Bilal from Zenfinity.net, and welcome to this MOBA or RTS movement tutorial where we're going to have the player automatically move to where we right click. So basically I have the actual starter project files in the top right here. You can click that, or they're in the description below. So just go ahead and download those and import them into a new project and open up our main scene here, or just follow along in your project. So what we're going to have to do here is use a nav mesh and a nav mesh agent for some navigation here for our player to know how to get to a certain point. And we're also going to have to do some ray casting from where our mouse cursor is and find a point on the ground where we click here. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and start with creating our player controller script here, which is going to actually determine like where our player can move by letting us click. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this one, and I'll go ahead and create a C# script called player controller. Okay, and I'll go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio. All right, and so what we want to do is basically have a camera reference. And we want to have a layer mask for our ground so that we know that our player only wants to move on the ground. And we just need to have a function for getting a point under where our cursor is. So let's go ahead and begin writing our attributes here. I have a camera called cam. And the reason for that is a performance optimization. So you'll see that in just a second. So then we'll create a public layer mask for the ground layer, which is going to allow us to raycast and only search for the ground layer. And then we'll have a public nav mesh agent. And this one's not included by default, so you can hit Control period or Alt Enter on a Mac, and it'll suggest these usings here. So I hit Enter here, and it'll toss using UnityEngine.ui up here. Okay, so let me then type player agent, and that's going to be basically the player. So our MOBA or RTS character or unit is going to be referenced by this rather than its own script, and it'll just go to that position once we right-click using the setDestination function. Okay, so let me go ahead and change this start to awake. And awake is a Unity mono behavior function that will run before any of the other ones, and it'll just happen whenever a game object is instantiated here. So let me go ahead and store our camera. So cam equals camera.main. And the reason I don't just use camera.main everywhere is because camera.main actually does a search every single time you access it, which means it's finding all objects with the tag, I believe, main camera. So basically, when we store it like this, we just make sure that we have a constant time reference to it. Okay, so let me go ahead in our update here. Actually, before we even edit the update function, let's go ahead and write our getPointUnderCursor function here. So what that's going to do is return a vector3 world position of where our mouse is hovering over. Now, the difference between a world position and a screen position is in Unity we have these coordinates, for basically a 2D UI, for example, which are basically the resolution of our game. So from the bottom left to the top right, and all those four corners, that's what our screen position is. A world position is the simulated kind of pretend world where we have a bunch of objects going whichever direction we want, and that's where game objects typically will lie, is in that world position when we're dragging things around with the transform component. So let's go ahead and create our private vector3 getPointUnderCursor. Okay, so we have a vector2 screen position like we talked about, which is just going to be the mouse's position. And now we have a world mouse position. So mouse world position. And that's just going to be basically where our camera sees our cursor. So let's go ahead and set that equal to cam screen to world point here. So that's going to convert a screen point to a world position. And inside there we'll type screen position. Okay, so now we have the world position. We want to raycast from that world position, which is up by our camera, and an X and Z, I believe, of where our mouse is. So let's go ahead and, all right, raycast hit. Just declare this here, hit position, and we're not going to use that just yet. And now we'll just write physics dot raycast mouse world position. So we're starting at the world position where our cursor is, and then we'll hit cam.transform.forward, and we'll store this by using out keyword, which basically will store certain data provided by a function into a variable here. So we pass a reference to this hit position variable, and then that raycast hit from this raycast function will be stored in there. And then I'll hit 100, or I'll type in 100 here for our distance, just for now, because that'll be sufficient. And I'll put ground layer at the end here and put a semicolon. Okay, so if you don't know what a raycast is, it's basically a line that shoots forward and checks if it'll hit a collider along its path, basically. And its path is 100 long, going from the origin and in the direction of where the camera is looking. Okay. So that means it should hit the ground if we click over the ground, otherwise it'll hit nothing. And we just want to return this hit position's point, which is really important that it's the point and not the transform's position, because that will just return us the center of what we clicked, or the pivot point of what we clicked, rather than the actual point exactly on that collider where we hit. Okay, so now that we have this function, that's really the beef of our script here. Now all we have to do is check if we right-click. So we can write if inputs.getMouseButtonDown. 1 is right-click. If you want left-click, it's 0, and I believe middle mouse click should be 2. So in here, we just want to set our player agent. That's destination here. So we use .setDestination, and we'll use getPointUnderCursor, since that function will return whatever is under the cursor. So whenever we right-click, we want to get the position under a cursor and pass it to our player agent so that it sets its destination there, and that will automatically start this path, and our player will walk to where we right-click. Now, before we're able to actually test that, let's go to Unity here, and we got to configure quite a few things here. So first, we have to add that to our player, a nav mesh agent, okay? And for now, I'm not going to worry about any of these details here. We'll set them in, later in the future, but right now it's not really important because these default values will work. So we also want to pop up in our window here. We'll hit nav. Oh, we type in N and hit enter, because that'll go down to our navigation tab here. And it'll pull up this navigation window here where we can choose where we want these nav meshes to generate. So what I'm going to do is select this level and set these 3 obstacles and the ground here to navigation static. And I'll just say yes, change children. So we want these 3 obstacles to have this selection of not walkable. And we want this level to have the selection of walkable. Now that means obviously our player or any nav mesh agent is able to go in that area, but the obstacles you're not able to go to because they're not walkable. So let's go ahead and hit bake here, and we can look at our scene, and yeah, we see this nav mesh, which is the blue stuff, has generated a walkable area around our obstacles. So now we should be able to just test this as long as we attach our player controller to some object here. I'll actually create an empty, not attached to that, and I'll call it game controller. And let's go ahead and drag our player controller here. Now we just want to make sure we drag our player's reference to here, and we set our ground layer to some layer that we haven't had yet. So why don't we go ahead and create a layer for our ground. So I'll hit add layer, and in here I'll just type ground. I'll hit enter, and then I'll click on our level object here, and I'll set the layer to ground, and I will say no, do not set it for all the children. Okay, so I saved our scene here, and if I hit, actually first we go to our game controller and set that to ground. So if I hit play, whenever I right click, our player will go to that position. And notice I can right click on this object too, and it'll raycast through it, and our player will go behind it because we're using this ground layer, which means that the raycast will only hit whatever has that layer applied, which is the ground in this case. So that's actually going to be it for this tutorial. Really basic, just how to move the character wherever we click. And that's generally something you'd want to do for, a MOBA or an RTS, or maybe just some Diablo style game. So, okay, that's going to be it for this tutorial. And if it helped you out, make sure to hit like and hit subscribe for the rest of these tutorials, and I'm going to be releasing 2 every week. Subscribe and hit the bell for all those notifications. And if you want to make your first game right now, we have a free ebook at the top right. You can go ahead and click that card. It's all the tools that you need to create your first game. And if you want to check out our sample video from our course to make spaceship controls, you can go ahead and click on that. That's pulled out of that course that we have, which is how to create your first game. With that said, I will see you in the next video, and have a good day.